Congressman Schiff, full disclosure, we have the same name. I am Richard Schiff.
How does the president spell your name?
Yeah, I'm sure with a few more T's than F's. It's a pleasure to be able to sit down with you. Again, full disclosure, we know each other. You're very close to my district in Los Angeles. I think we miss each other by a couple of blocks. I've been a fan of yours, an admirer of yours, and thank you for sitting down with us.
It's a great pleasure. I'm a great fan and admirer of yours.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. So I'm noticing in the office, you have Starry Night Van Gogh, which must be what it feels like coming out of the Intelligence Committee every day. A bit of a nightmare. But you have Eisenhower, Teddy Roosevelt, Abraham Lincoln, 3 Republicans on your wall. You do have FDR, you do have Obama, and I think that's Bill Clinton over there. But it's interesting to me that you have Republican presidents, if not icons, on your wall. Does that remind you of, is that to remind you of anything in particular?
Well, it is, and actually there's another Republican on the wall too. In the photograph with Eisenhower is my grandfather. He was a Republican county chairman,
okay,
and worked on Eisenhower's re-election. And my mother's side of the family were all Republicans, and my father's side of the family were all Democrats. And
exciting dinners.
Yes, but my folks raised their 2 sons to believe that neither party had a monopoly on good judgment all the time. And I always keep in mind when I was first walking precincts as a young candidate, people would often tell me, I'm going to support you, I'm going to vote for you, but I'm going to count on you to do the right thing, not the Democratic thing or the Republican thing. And I think that's where a great many Americans are. They want the government to represent them and attend to the nation's problems. And we've had some great leaders in both parties, and some of them are on these in these photographs on these walls. And I am a big Teddy Roosevelt fan and a big Franklin Roosevelt fan, and so it's nice to be in their presence. And I think the giant of them all is Abraham Lincoln. I think he's the most interesting character in American history. Started out, like so many people, absolutely dirt poor, but had such a brilliant mind that he was able to lift himself up out of those circumstances and not only become a great president, but he wrote and spoke like a poet. Probably one of the best writers ever to be President of the United States. And I just think he's the most quintessentially interesting American story.
I noticed, the reason why I noticed it is because in your history you actually co-sponsored a bill with Mike Pence years ago having to do with freedom of press, is that correct?
Yes.
Worldwide freedom of press and so on. What was your relationship like with Congressman Pence, and what is it like today? Do you speak, given the your status on the Intelligence Committee, now chairman, and your attack, for lack of a better word, on Trump and the disposition of this administration?
Mike and I came into Congress together, and I think one of the good things that I did quite by accident when I got elected is I went to all of the orientation weekends and briefings that were offered. So I went to the progressive ones, the conservative ones, and everything in between. And the result was that I got to know my Republican classmates quite well. And some of them ended up being great partners on a lot of different issues. John Culberson of Texas and I worked together on NASA funding, and Mike Pence and I worked together on freedom of the press issues, and we formed a caucus on freedom of the press. We haven't had an opportunity to talk much in the last couple of years, not out of any animosity, but I think the nature of his duties has meant that I haven't seen him very often. Although the last time we did was at a press dinner where he was nice enough to acknowledge my work on the issue. And sadly, that work is more important than ever. When Mike and I formed this caucus, we were really focused on freedom of the press issues in other countries. Now we have a situation where our own president views the press as the enemy of the people.
Not only that, but does not investigate let's put it this way, supports the Saudis' position on Khashoggi's murder. It's beyond my capacity to understand how a president of this United States can take that position, put business ahead of a very basic American value, which is freedom of the press. The press is being delegitimized. Our elections are being delegitimized. You're on the front lines. Let's get right to the committee's work. You're now chairman. What do you face? Who are you going to subpoena first?
You know, I can't say who we'll subpoena first, in part because...
I meant that as a joke, because I know there's going to be a list.
But it's an important point. We are going to seek to have voluntary cooperation first. So whether it's witnesses or going to businesses in an effort to get documents, and I may need to grab a glass of water.
Do you want to borrow this? I'm not sick.
Oh, sure. We are cousin after all.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. You know, it's our practice to always seek voluntary compliance first. So we'll request that witnesses come in, we'll request documents from organizations, and only if they refuse do we have to resort to subpoenas. So it's my hope that we'll get voluntary compliance, but I know there will be times where a subpoena will be necessary. One of our, I think, early steps will be to provide the transcripts that we have obtained after interviewing these witnesses to the special counsel so that he can use them for purposes of determining whether witnesses have been truthful before Congress, but also to see what evidence they contain and to compare it with what he knows. We'll also try to deconflict our own investigation from the work that he's doing. There are a number of witnesses that we're both deeply interested in. Michael Cohen, for example, I would love to come back to our committee. We know now, because of his guilty plea, that there were things he told our committee that were not true. But we don't know whether there were other things that he would also now like to tell us that he did not the first time around. So we're deeply interested in his cooperation. There are other witnesses that we invited to come in before and told us essentially to pound sand. Now we'll have the ability to say, well, you can come in voluntarily or you can come in through a subpoena.
And is Jared Kushner one of those people?
He may be one of those people. He did come and testify before the committee. There were a number of questions he was not willing to answer.
But he was allowed to leave. I mean, he was allowed to not answer questions. And the Republicans kind of suggest to him that, hey, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. Different atmosphere now that you're chairman?
Yes, and you're exactly right. There were any number of witnesses, and he was one of them who would simply refuse to answer questions they didn't want to answer because they felt it might incriminate them or it might incriminate others, or they simply had their own reasons which they wouldn't share with the committee. Sometimes they claimed bogus privileges. In the case of Jared Kushner, or Don Jr. or Steve Bannon, there were claims of either attorney-client privilege or the White House asked me not to. I mean, interestingly, I don't know that anyone actually claimed executive privilege. Bannon came the closest when he said, I've been asked by the White House not to answer these questions.
Right.
At the same time, the White House was saying publicly, we're completely cooperating with Congress. They were privately telling witnesses, don't answer any of these questions. With Bannon, that covered entire periods of time. And we would ask, are you claiming some kind of very broad, unheard of executive privilege that will cover the entire time of the transition or the entire time you worked in the administration? And all too often the answer was no. I simply was asked by the White House not to answer your questions. For those of us that are laymen and for those of us that are citizens, this is a picture of Washington that we never imagined. Certainly someone who was on a TV show like The West Wing, which created a very idealized, hopeful atmosphere. We've had samples of that in the real world, in the Clinton and the Obama administration. We're confused. I mean, where do you see the end game here? Well, first of all, I'm grateful for shows like West Wing that, yes, were idealized, but also inspired people in public service as to, what we might strive to be like. And, the reality falls far short of that, and it's never fallen more farther short than it is right now.
Yeah.
But it gave, I think, a sense of optimism about government service that motivated a lot of us to go into government service. Many of us were motivated by, don't ask what your country can do for you, that whole idea. This is not a joyful time to serve in the Congress, but it's a really important one. I've never felt that the institutions of our government were so much at risk as I do today. When the president is attacking the judiciary and the press and meeting privately with the Attorney General to discuss a case in which he may be implicated, and norm after norm, policy after policy being trampled, when the president's lawyer says truth isn't truth and his spokesperson says that they're entitled to their own alternate facts, and his communications director every day weaves fiction into some alternate reality, and truth itself is under attack. It's a very important time to serve as one of the protectors of our democracy. We will get through this. There are days when I feel I'm on a ship and the rivets are popping off and we're taking on water and I'm despairing about what's happening to the ship of state. But then I realize we are still afloat. And we will get through this. Now, where it ends, I don't know. I presume it ends with Donald Trump being voted out of office. But Bob Mueller will have a lot to say about that. We shouldn't prejudge what he concludes or the evidence that he's gathered. We have our own responsibilities with our investigation in Congress. At the end of the day, we need to be able to tell the American people exactly what took place in the 2016 election and whether a foreign nation, a foreign adversary, has leverage over the President of the United States.
One more question. Legislative agenda, is there one particular bill that you're looking forward to initiating or continuing? And how do you see success on the legislative side for the next 2 years?
Well, I would say on the national level, probably our first open hearing in the Intel Committee will be on the issue of the rise of authoritarianism around the world. And to me, this is
great.
The bigger, broader story than Russian intervention in our election, and that is the degree to which democracies are under pressure and assault and challenge around the world, and how America must continue to play the role of champion of democracy and human rights. We are not living up to our historic responsibility right now, and it's at a time when autocrats are on the rise and we really need to. So that's going to be an important priority of our committee, to focus on that and to shed light on that and to develop a policy response to that. I think that's the big ideological struggle of our day. It's not communism versus capitalism, but it is authoritarianism versus democracy and representative government. I would say broadly for our caucus, the top two priorities are trying to help American families raise their incomes, because we have seen the gap between rich and poor grow more and more vast, and the middle class under increasing pressure with wages stagnant and income stagnant. But also we want to preserve people's access to care, which is also at risk. And those are two very big, broad priorities for us. And the border, can you talk about that? Because we're close to the border, living in California. We have many immigrants working in our communities. It's my hope that we can once again take up that which we almost got past several years ago, and that is comprehensive immigration reform that deals with a whole host of immigration challenges we face, and does so in a way that is humane, that is true to our values, that maintains security at the border, that maintains the rule of law. None of that is beyond our capacity to do. We've got to get beyond fighting over a wall that's never going to get built and Mexico's never going to pay for. Right. But the problem is much broader than that. About 40% of people who are here illegally came on visas and simply stayed, and you could build a wall, a mile high, and it wouldn't solve that problem. So we need to make reforms to our immigration laws to make them fair, to make them enforceable, and make sure that our immigration policy is humane. And we, first and foremost, need to end this abysmal practice of separating children from their families.
Yes, I concur. I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the way that you articulate positions and your belief in the process of this government. And for many of us, I thank you.
Well, I thank you, and I look forward to the next installment of Schiff on Schiff.
Yes, we'll make it a weekly.
Excellent.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.